Hi there. This is the first in a series of videos on your training project. This semester, you're going to complete what is actually a really big training project, and a lot of people take this work with them as they go on to become supervisors. So it's exciting. It's almost like a transition toward the role you'll probably be taking on in the not too distant future. To do training well, it's a very complex task, as you'll learn over the course of the semester. And so our goal is to make sure that you're prepared to train in any setting where you might end up being a supervisor for direct care staff. And I want to make that distinction from the beginning. Our goal isn't about how are you training behavior analysts or even RBTs. A lot of your direct care staff might be RBTs, but in a lot of settings, they aren't RBTs. They aren't paraprofessionals that have years of experience in training. They are people who have high school degrees. Their last job might have been working in fast food or in a cleaning or entertainment industry. They might have worked in a movie theater. And now they're transitioning into this kind of job. And what you have to do to support those folks is more challenging. But at the same time, if you could learn to deliver training to them that is comprehensive, that considers their perspective, is respectful, and is sensitive to your client population, their care providers, and still takes advantage of the best available evidence we have on training, then you end up in a great position as you leave this course. So I know that's a lot to think about as you start this project, but I do want to let you know this is the rationale for where we start. All right, so we're going to talk first about Section 1. And before I do that, I guess I will say you are expected to have a table of contents that is hyperlinked to other sections of your training project. So Section 1. In Section 1, we have crafted some of these sections for you, and you just fill in the blanks in those sections. Now that might seem like, oh great, that'll be really easy, but it's not. Here's why. Your job is to read and digest and understand and ask questions about these sections, because these sections set the stage for everything that follows in the training project. All of the materials for the trainer, as well as the materials you develop for your trainees or your direct care staff. Okay, so in Section 1, it begins with the purpose. And the purpose, there's this project is basically broken down into two steps. The first one is a training manual. And the training manual is written for the trainer. It's so that people who will be supervisors like you know how to conduct comprehensive training, all of the things that go into it, including the ongoing supports that are necessary. And most of this training project is the training manual. So most of it is being written at a level where you can use jargon, you can be pretty technical. In fact, you can be very technical, and you're asked to be technical in some places. But then the last part of the project is Section 5, and in Section 5 is where you develop all of the training materials. And your training materials need to be geared toward your target audience. As I've already mentioned, these are often people that have little or no experience in behavior analysis, in education, and our job, and they may have only ever heard of what maybe reinforcement is. And so your job is to provide what is one of the first trainings that they will experience, if not the very first training that they're going to experience on a function-based intervention. All right, so the purpose section is mostly written for you, and you fill in the blank. But again, read through it carefully and make sure you think about it. I actually recommend going back and reading through the sections that were written for you in this first section as you complete later materials, because a lot of times where students lose points or they have to go back and redo a bunch of work before they submit their final training project, it's because they didn't connect to these early materials. So you want to keep it really fresh in your mind as you proceed through the project. All right. Before I move on to the next section, I do want to say we want you to be connecting each and every part of this training project, or almost every part of this training project, to task list 5 and or the Professional Ethical Compliance Code. This is a course that is often the last course people take before they graduate, and it's your job as a supervisor to be constantly integrating every decision you make into our Professional Ethical Compliance Code. But also, we want you to start to see that all of these pieces do actually interact with preparing you for the BCBA exam. And some of you may be asking, why task list 5? I'm hoping to take the exam based on task list 4, and I will tell you why. Behavior analysis is behavior analysis, whether it's task list 5 or task list 4. But they are described in slightly different ways. And so if you're planning on taking the exam based on task list 4, prepare with task list 4, but being exposed to and regularly thinking about task list 5 is just a different way of organizing what we talk about in behavior analysis. So it shouldn't require new or different skills, but what it will do is help you look at things through a slightly different lens, and that's a good thing. That'll help prepare you better. All right, on to the next section. The trainer qualifications. There are 2 different kinds of trainers I want you to talk about in this section. The first one is the person who will be providing most of the trainings. And so there are a lot of different training materials. There are PSIs, which you'll learn more about this semester. There are PowerPoint plus instruction. There is modeling. There is role play, and there is coaching and feedback. And almost all of these are way more detailed than you're anticipating right now. But that'll just give you a sense of some of the skill sets that the person has to have. So you want the person who's leading that, I mean, really, they have to be knowledgeable. They have to have a deep understanding of behavior analysis, not just the intervention. They have to have experience. Ideally, they've got experience supervising and giving feedback, and also learning from the process of training other people, and that they have a history of providing culturally sensitive training. The other person I want you to describe is, I'm going to call them a confederate. And the confederate is going to be somebody that works at the center or the school or whatever setting you select. And they're going to be in the helper role. And so what they will do is, for example, with modeling, they'll be the one who is playing the role of the client, so that you're not just grabbing somebody from the room and asking them to play that part. You want somebody who has training, who has experience, and will be respectful and serve as a model as they move into role playing for how you're supposed to perform this role. We never want anyone behaving as if it's okay to mock people with disabilities. We want this person to be very respectful of the disability community and really be opposed to an ableist perspective. All right, so the trainer qualification section. The next section is where you describe your client or your student population. You can actually even use other terms. Some people prefer consumer, and there are some other terms out there. What I care about is that it's a respectful term and it matches the population that you're going to be serving. And here's where you describe your client population, including all the variability. What is the age range of people you're serving? What are the sexes? What are the skills within their repertoire? What are their races and ethnicities? What are the range of clinical goals you might have for them? If you're serving older clients, you might include what is their gender identity and sexual orientation, because all of these may be relevant to how you prepare your training materials. So your trainer that you're imagining handing these materials off to needs to know, okay, what kind of example should I be able to give, for example? You're also going to include things like what are the primary diagnoses, include any comorbidities, what level of support the clients need, and I give you a resource here that'll help you include more meat on that section. And then finally, you want to describe your caregivers, because our caregivers are our partners in training. And a lot of times I might select a treatment on the basis of, okay, I've got multiple good options in front of me. What is the preference of, let's say, a parent? Or if the grandparent is implementing the intervention, what are their preferences? Because I'd rather select a treatment that I can implement both at home and at school than one that I'm just using in one setting. So I need lots of information there. What are their preferences for interventions? How available are they to collaborate? How much do they accept their child's disability? Are there specific cultural variables we should be sensitive to? There are times where people, behavior analysts, make recommendations for interventions that are deeply in contrast with the culture of the client population that we're serving. And their caregivers are part of that client grouping. And the last thing I want to say before I leave this group is make sure you go back to the APA publication manual. I've got a link here for Purdue OWL that you can go into. The field has shifted, and we are more often using the language that people want to use to describe themselves. We want to make sure we're using bias-free language. And so, for example, I have switched after 20 years of saying people with autism. I now say autistic people or autistic clients or autistic students. And the reason I do that is because of the people that I've talked to that are on the autism spectrum. What they've told me is that their preference is to be called autistic clients or autistic people. And their rationale is when you say a person with autism, you're almost like adding that on as if it's not them, it's some add-on to them, and they define themselves by this identity. There's a lot of support that they get from each other. They create communities where they're supportive of each other, and this is just part of who they are. Just like there are lots of things that you see as part of yourself, and you wouldn't want that to be considered something separate. All right, the next section. The next section is mostly written for you. It's the settings section. You are welcome to tweak it. Like I said, if you wanted to say it was happening at a school instead of a center or a community-based setting, a hospital, whatever setting is appropriate. But you need to have the kind of details that are going to be included in this section. You need to have a description of the community, and it needs to be a diverse community. So I've written an example for you. You're welcome to tweak it. But you should talk to your instructor before you make any of those kinds of changes. And then it also talks about the kinds of settings that you're going to be providing training in, not just where you provide services. And so I might use PowerPoint with instruction, do modeling, and even role play in a conference room or in a training room. But then coaching and feedback, that's got to happen in the real world, because I don't care how good you are at implementing an intervention during role play, you could be a natural and hit it right immediately without any problem. But then when you've got all the competing demands that you face as you provide services, you realize, wow, this is a different story. I've got a lot of other people around me. There are a lot of noises. The client's behavior might be very different. And so you need to be able to make sure that coaching and feedback is happening in the real setting where you provide services. All right, the next section is also mostly written for you. Again, you can tweak this, but especially get permission if you do. This is the staff description, and the reason that I want this to stay mostly the way it is, a lot of you have the luxury of being in settings where everyone has an undergraduate degree already and they're working toward their master's degree, where this is exactly what they wanted to do for a job, that their heart is completely in it, and that's the only reason that they're here. And I have to tell you, you aren't always going to be in that situation. The field is moving more toward having service providers be RBTs, but I can also tell you that's not going to be the case in many, many settings. So, for example, in a lot of residential settings, when you have somebody who's working the night shift, there might be all kinds of variables that's going to influence why you might not train them. I did the night shift in a community mental health center about 25, 30 years ago. And the amount of time I had direct contact with our clients was really limited. And so the training that I got was far less focused on interventions. And the night staff at a residential setting might be the same way. And so they might focus on just a small number of interventions, which is, again, why you doing just one intervention here as a training makes sense. Alrighty, what's last? The training objectives for our direct care staff. This is a place where students often lose points for two different reasons. It's a shift, and I need you to work hard at the shift. It's a shift to go from thinking always about your clients to thinking about your direct care staff. These objectives are for your direct care staff. They are not focused on your clients. Of course you have to have those, but those are separate from this. Think of your direct care staff as now the recipients of your intervention, and your intervention is this comprehensive training program. And so what you need to be able to do is to assess their progress on clear objectives, clear behavioral objectives that have clear criteria associated with them. And so one example could be passing a post-test on knowledge acquisition with a score of 90% or higher. And then you might want to include in there even if they don't pass, whether they have an opportunity for remediation, how many times they can retake it, and what is the consequence if they never reach that level. And so I want you to think about your direct care staff when you're developing these, and you need to have a pretty good number of them to reflect all the trainings all the training components that you're going to be doing. The other thing I want to make sure that I say is this is a place where I see people lose points because you're just developing this at the beginning of this project, and your understanding of the project is just going to blossom and grow over the course of the semester. And so the original training objectives you generate are without you really thinking about all of the pieces that you actually put together in reality. When you get to Section 5 and you're developing those materials, or after you develop Section 5 where you've developed all of these training materials, you definitely want to come back and visit this training objectives, because your training objectives have to match the materials that you have. So for example, I've given people perfect scores on their training objectives in the section when they're completing just this section as a first draft, and then got back and they lost points. Why? Because they didn't train so that a client or the direct care staff can be expected to meet their training objective. So there has to be a match between your materials and the training you provide and your training objectives. And you can't be sure about that match until you have completed all of the sections of the training project. All right, it's a lot of information, and here's what I'm going to leave you with. I have so many students that get stellar scores on this project. I mean, it's a massive project. It's not just a lot of work. It's a huge number of points. Not only do you have first draft sections that you complete, but then you have a component where you partner with another group and give each other feedback. And then there's the comprehensive project. So all together, this training project, when you add the partner group, the intergroup assignment in, is worth more than half of your grade. And so it's a huge task. With it being a huge task, I'm going to beg you to reach out to your instructor. I meet with my students all the time. Sometimes it's just a quick 10-minute video conference. Sometimes the whole group jumps on with me. Sometimes just one member reaches out to me. But I will tell you, that's what we are here for. It's our job to create an environment where you can be successful. And this is a task that's different than any that you've looked at before. So unless you have a long history of developing training materials, this is going to be kind of overwhelming. And there are going to be places where you're likely to misstep if you don't get supports. And our job is to be here to support you. And so if you're one of my students, you're taking my sections, please reach out to me. But if you're not, please reach out to your instructor. And I will add this one last thing. Sometimes I don't get my emails that you send me through Canvas, and I assume that your instructor is in the same boat. So if you ever find yourself in the situation where you've emailed your instructor a couple of times and they haven't responded, email them at their Ball State account directly instead, and then CC me and let me know, okay, I haven't heard from them and I've tried a couple of times. I've waited 48 hours, and so at least the first time, and 24 hours the second time. And so, Susan, can you help me out? Because I am happy to facilitate that for you if I can do that. I really just want to see you all be successful in this project, and I know your instructor feels the same way. All right, see ya.